Imagine an athlete at the peak of his career, he's winning titles, breaking records, and inspiring, of course, millions of young athletes all around the world. And suddenly, one day, everything changes. Investigation reveals that his success was not fueled just by talent and hard work, but by banned performance enhancing drugs. His medals are stripped, his reputation destroyed, and fans are left questioning, what they once admired. Well, that's the story of, or the reality of Lance Armstrong, the seven-time Tour de France champion, whose legacy collapsed after a major doping scandal. Now, what makes this case so powerful is that it reflects both the pressure to succeed and the willingness to cross ethical boundaries in sports. Hello everyone, I am Jane Francis, a sports administration master's student at St. Thomas University. Deviance in sports refers to behavior that goes against the accepted norms and standards within the sporting environment. Renowned sports sociologist Jay Coakley argues that the deviance in sports is often shaped by the sports ethics of performance, which is categorized into four: that athletes must be willing to pay the price or make sacrifices, athletes must be willing to play through pain, ignore their health, take adverse risks just to excel in sports, and athletes must be willing to break records, outdo themselves, outdo their competitors, and finally, athletes should never see limitations. And of course, this would lead me into the next discussion, which is the fact that these sports ethics go on to push athletes into one of the two forms of deviance that we have in sports. So the two forms are over-conformity and under-conformity. Over-conformity, which is sometimes described as positive deviance, occurs when athletes adhere too strictly to the norms and values of sports ethics, which we enumerated earlier. So sometimes they make so much sacrifices, they ignore everybody in their life, cut off their family just to be there for the game, go for their practices and play through pain. And according to Hughes and Coakley in 1991, athletes who confirm or over-confirm, to this ethics standards, go on to slide into the negative deviance of substance abuse because they are now desperate to excel and they can't take anything less. In contrast to over-conformity is also the other one, which is under-conformity, or sometimes called the negative deviance. It involves the rejection or violation of accepted norms and rules of the sport. So, and this one sometimes even go beyond the sports to general society, like maybe sexual abuse or cheating, drink alcohol, drink binging, and all of that. So this is just not about breaking the rules in the sports, but also breaking even societal norms. And so in my opinion, you would have more prevalence of over-conformity in scholastic and collegiate level of sports, because at this level, at least are still trying to break even. They're still trying to become more visible and get drafted into the professional team. So they are making all the commitments, working hard just to get drafted. However, at the professional level, there's more money, more fame, and that's when you have athletes, going over to under-conformity. That's why you have more of baby mamas for professional athletes. That's where you have binge drinking, DUI cases for the professional athletes, because now they have more fame, they have more money. However, I have a few examples also. So Cristiano Ronaldo easily comes to mind. His reputation of his discipline, work ethics, and commitment to excellence, and intense training routines, relentless pursuit of peak performance. He always wants to win. So these things often are admired by many athletes, but not many can do it. And also the media and the fans, always make reference and wish that their star soccer players can be like Cristiano Ronaldo. But then that kind of dedication, which is good and contributes to success, also sometimes blurs the line between commitment and how people can manage their own reality and rather than not put themselves into risk. Another example also is, Oscar Pistorius, who was convicted for the murder of his girlfriend, River Steenkamp, and his action represent a clear violation of both societal and sporting norms. Of course, he was eventually convicted, but then also in his case highlights how sometimes society enable, negative deviance from sports stars, because it took the appellate court overruling the High Court in South Africa 2 times for him to be sentenced properly, because initially he was ruled as culpable homicide, and the appellate court overruled that and said it was murder, and then he was sentenced to 5 years imprisonment, and the appellate court overruled that and he was eventually sentenced to 13 years imprisonment. Also, Tiger Woods easily comes to mind with his history of DUI incidents, which reflects his behavior that contradicts the expectation placed on a professional athlete like him. But then from playing through pain, he probably got addicted to the use of these drugs, which are more of painkillers, but also have, a huge effect on his person. So at the end of the day, yes, it's good to encourage athletes, to motivate them, motivate arousal in their performance, but also to know where to draw the line so that athletes, do not always stay in the middle, rather than slipping into over-conformity or under-conformity. So, as a future sports leader, it is our responsibility to understand that yes, it is important to encourage athletes to motivate them for high performance, but then also striking a balance, not to overpush them within their physical and mental limits. Encouraging athletes to set realistic goals and prioritizing their well-being is always more important than the over commercialization of sports, where everybody wants to have a big brand that would be patronized by sports sponsors and investors. Thank you very much.